The rain always seemed colder on New Terra. Or maybe it just felt that way to David Mercer, trudging down the neon-lit streets of Port Halley with his hood pulled tight against the downpour. Even after 20 years, humans hadn't quite managed to terraform this planet's atmosphere to Earth's warmth. The sky remained a perpetual slate gray, the air damp and biting. David was on his way home from a 12-hour shift at the dockyards, where he worked repairing bulk freighters. It was honest work but lonely. He lived in a cramped apartment at the edge of the district, surrounded by strangers who rarely made eye contact. That was when he saw her. She sat slumped in the shadows of a loading bay, a figure huddled in a tattered cloak. At first, David assumed she was another drifter or a scavenger. But when the streetlight flickered above her, he froze. Her skin shimmered faintly with a lavender hue. Her hair, or what looked like hair, was a flowing cascade of silver strands, plastered against her face by the rain. An alien. Not unusual in Port Halley. The city was a trade hub where dozens of species crossed paths. But there was something different about this one. She wasn't moving. Her shoulders trembled, and her arms hugged her knees as if she were trying to vanish into herself. David hesitated. He wasn't the kind of man who meddled in other people's problems. But something about her, fragile and alone, stirred an ache in his chest. "Hey," he said gently, pulling back his hood. "You all right out here?" The alien woman slowly raised her head. Her eyes glowed faintly in the dark, a crystalline blue with vertical slits like a cat's. For a long moment she just stared, as though startled by his voice. Then she looked away again. "Go," she whispered, her voice hoarse but melodic. "They do not want me. You should not either." David frowned. "Who doesn't want you?" "My kin. My house." He shuddered. "I failed them. Now I am nothing." David rubbed the back of his neck. She looked thin, too thin, like she hadn't eaten properly in weeks. The dockyard gangs weren't kind to homeless humans, let alone aliens. Leaving her here meant leaving her to die. "Look," he said finally, sighing at his own foolishness. "I've got a small place nearby. It's warm. And there's food. If you want." Her eyes widened slightly, suspicious. "Why? Why would you offer this to me?" David gave a faint, awkward smile. "Because it looks like you need it. And nobody deserves to be left in the rain." Her name was Lyra. She told him this the next morning, once she'd thawed out in his apartment. David had given her a blanket, a hot meal of protein stew, and the spare bed in his guest room that mostly collected dust. She ate carefully, almost guiltily, as though expecting him to snatch the bowl away at any moment. Lyra belonged to the Zalari, one of the old noble races that traded across the galaxy. From what David gathered, she had been cast out of her house after refusing a political marriage. Refusing wasn't just frowned upon, it was considered betrayal. She had been stripped of her title, her wealth, and even her name in the Zalari registry. "Among my people," she explained softly, her hands clasped in her lap. "Family is everything. Without it I am nothing. Not even worth shelter." David felt anger boil inside him. "That's insane. They just throw you away because you wouldn't marry someone." She nodded, her gaze fixed on the floor. "Yes, to them I am a broken piece of the chain. Better discarded than kept." David shook his head. He couldn't imagine a culture like that. Back on Earth, families fought, broke apart, and reconciled all the time, but to erase someone entirely chilled him. Over the next weeks, Lyra stayed. At first, she was quiet, shy, moving through his home like a ghost afraid to touch anything. But gradually she warmed. She helped tidy his cluttered shelves. She cooked with him, teaching him Zalari spices he'd never heard of. Sometimes she laughed, a bright ringing sound that made David's heart stumble. The neighbors whispered, of course. Humans didn't often bring alien women into their homes, especially not ones who clearly had nowhere else to go. But David ignored them. He hadn't expected companionship. He hadn't expected how natural it felt, coming home from work and seeing her waiting with a faint smile. One evening, as they shared a bottle of cheap wine, David finally asked, "So what happens now? You planning to go back to your people someday?" Lyra's expression darkened. "I cannot return, even if I wished it. To them, I am already dead." She hesitated, then added, Unless I were to bond with another." David tilted his head. "Bond? Like marriage?" "Yes. A recognized union with someone beyond my house. Then perhaps I might build a new place for myself." She looked at him then, really looked, with those crystalline eyes that seemed to cut right through him. For a heartbeat neither spoke. Then Lyra quickly looked away, her cheeks flushing faint lavender. David's throat went dry. He laughed awkwardly to break the silence. "Well, I'm not exactly the marrying type. Never got past the first date with most women." But that night, lying awake in his bed, her words haunted him. He told himself it was crazy. She was alien. She deserved someone better. And yet, the thought of her leaving made his chest ache in ways he didn't want to admit. Conflict. Trouble came sooner than expected. A Zalari envoy ship docked at Port Halley 2 months later. David came home to find Lyra pale and trembling. "They know I am here," she whispered. "They will come." "Who?" David asked, alarmed. "My house. They will not tolerate dishonor lingering. They may try to take me back, or end me." David clenched his fists. He had no power, no influence. Just an apartment, a job, and a stubborn streak. But he wasn't about to let anyone hurt her. Sure enough, the next night, 2 Zalari nobles arrived, flanked by armored guards. They demanded entry, sneering when they saw David. "You harbor a cast-off human," one hissed. "Release her to us or face consequence." David planted himself in the doorway, heart pounding. "She's not your property. She stays." The noble's eyes glittered coldly. "You would defy us? For a broken exile?" David swallowed his fear and answered, "Yeah, I would." The standoff lasted long minutes. Finally, the nobles spat curses in their own tongue and left, vowing this was not over. Lyra stared at David, her eyes wide with something between fear and awe. "You risked everything," she whispered. He shrugged, trying to mask the adrenaline shaking his hands. "Couldn't just let them take you. You're family now." The word slipped out before he could stop it. "Family." He saw her lips tremble, her eyes glistening. Slowly, she reached out and touched his hand. Ending. Life changed after that. The Zalari never returned, perhaps deciding it wasn't worth the scandal. But something had shifted between David and Lyra. They were no longer just host and guest, but something deeper. Something that grew with every shared smile, every quiet evening cooking together, every time their hands brushed and lingered. Months later, David found himself standing awkwardly in the small courtyard outside the civic hall, dressed in his best jacket. Lyra stood beside him, radiant in a flowing gown of silver fabric she had sewn herself. The human officiant read the vows in simple words, translated into Zalari through a device. When it came time, David's voice shook, but he spoke from the heart.